keep in mind, guys, this is only a scanning computer. It's not like these badasses over here. It does not do the same amount of image processing. However, you do sign in the exact same way. So best security in the house, right? The screen and password is literally on the screen, but they're worried about security. Anyway, obviously C student, and of course, I won't say it out loud, but literally it's on YouTube now, so. Just keep in mind, it's only for scanning. And funny enough, I actually looked this up. It's a 20-year-old machine. It is still the same price as it was. I don't know how it avoided inflation, but it's crazy because it's still $3,000. So, so please be careful with it, is what I'm trying to say. It basically works like a camera, right? Except it doesn't have a lens. So it's not refocusing the light onto a small sensor. This is the sensor, and it's an orthographic view, right? If you know anything about cameras and focal length and refraction and all that kind of stuff, it is what it is. Can't tell you how many times I see students accidentally scan this side. I don't know who needs to hear this, but the camera is facing up, and your picture, you want it to be facing down. You may also notice that this picture is way too big. So we'll need multiple shots of it, multiple scans, and we'll actually stitch that together with a click of a button in Photoshop. It's called photo merge, right? So we'll take this piece, and if you have a translucent piece, like especially trace paper, I would grab some other sheets and make sure you cover the back. You probably don't need that many sheets, but make sure, of course, you put the paper back. And very often what I do is just make like another 11 by 17, or just to get enough. I don't know who needs to hear this, but this also comes off. It's also got the worst paper on here from like 8 years ago. It's not white anymore, but it comes off. Make sure you do put it back on it, right? But very often what we do is just put books or something a little heavy on it. Don't sit on it, for God's sakes. Like I said, $1,000 glass there. But make sure you put that back, right? First things first, we'll take a shot. What I like to do is actually, there's a lot of air in there. All those little air, even microscopically, is gonna mess up our image. So you kind of wanna spread it out, if you will. Very often, I even have a friend who kind of like puts his arm there while he scans because he's just terrified of those bubbles. Again, especially on trace where it's, who is not taking care of their paper, it definitely starts to show, and you definitely start to pay for it in the amount of Photoshop work that you have to do. But first things first, you type in Epson, not Epstein. It's really sad that everybody knows that name now, but I've been talking about it since 2018. Nobody even wanted to listen. Anyway, they're like, oh, Chris, there's not a elite cabal. Anyway, so you go to professional mode, make sure that it's at 300. I would say the better DPI is about 350, especially on these computers that can handle like 600 DPI. Keep in mind, not all computers can handle large images, right? So usually what I do by default is about 350 now. It used to be 300, and again, times change, things get better. So most of all, make sure that it's in 24-bit color. But sir, it's grayscale. I know that, but we want 16.7 million colors to choose from, not 32, right? And of course, those 32 grays are in that 16.7 million colors. So make sure that it's in 24-bit color, 350, and we'll hit preview first. So it's basically gonna take a picture. I don't know how many of us know how a scanner does or doesn't work, but it's essentially a very bright light that is basically ray traced, right? And as you can see, we're getting an image, but we don't get the whole thing, my goodness. So one thing that I could do is actually just probably shift the paper around. I probably would get the whole thing. But in my case, another thing that we can do, guys, is you can actually select the part that you want to scan. So instead of wasting that time going all the way through the entire scanner, you can actually just scan a smaller portion of it. Once I'm done, if I want to save that file, I hit scan. It's going to bring up where do I want to scan it to. In my case, I want to put it on my USB. So put my USB in. CVP comes up, hopefully. Voila. We'll save it there and scan. So now that you have some downtime, this is the part where you go into the files. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously another Epson joke, but scans. Now check this out. This is where it gets really important. If you do want to do photo merge, you have to have these two images actually overlap with each other. So they can't just like be butt to butt. The computer won't know actually what pixels to put together. What they do need is a slight overlap. I would say anywhere from 1 to 2, 3 inches is golden, right? But you want some of that overlap, and it doesn't matter how it overlaps, but it needs some overlap, right? So in my case, I could probably, just knowing the size of the paper, just flip it around, right? And of course, move my white paper to the portion of the image itself. I don't want to bend your paper, but faking it till we make it today. Again, a little bit of a press to get rid of that air bubble, and we're good. I probably want to do another preview. I, after all, have a very different image, I'm sure. And as you can see, I got the last bit of it. So I don't want that anymore, so I could actually delete it and get a new shot. Keep in mind, you'll notice like just the edges of that white start to kind of gray out. You can kind of see the rolling of the paper. I definitely want to make sure I eliminate that because I definitely don't want that in my final piece. From there, scan, same spot, we'll press OK. But this is actually a good point to be said. The higher the DPI, the bigger I can make the image as well. If you've ever seen like a billboard of like, you know, Jim Adler or something, you better believe that is a really high density pixel shot. That way there's actually millions of pixels there. That way you can see it clearly from the edge of the road. Go ahead and record, and let's get to that piece. So, gonna go over both programs today, but really a majority Photoshop. If I haven't explained this before, and I always wonder how many times I explain this, so I'm sorry if you've been in my class before. It is slightly a review. But we use Photoshop for images and rasterized program, right? That is what it is. It's a pixelated program, and it doesn't use vectors, right? Vector and raster are two different language systems, right? Photoshop does really well at rasters and pixelated items. Illustrator does really well at vector and raster. So just want to point that out. And of course, it'll be absolutely clear by the time we get through this tutorial. So from here, the first thing that I want to do is actually check, my images. So I double click, go to those two pieces, make sure that I got them. All right, we got one, we got two. And for the most part, it looks like I got some overlap. We'll find out, right, if I actually got some overlap or not. So first I'll go to Photoshop, File, Automate, and Photo Merge. This is probably the easiest thing you could possibly ever do, right? And what's really great about that is I can have a shot the size of this room, and I can just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I could just do an entire grid pattern that's overlapped and suddenly have a billboard size image from 11 by 17 scanner. Is that making sense? Hopefully so. But from here, you'll go to File, Automate, Photo Merge. Once we do that, obviously you'll keep it on auto, but keep in mind, especially if you have a lot of images. Like one time I got this really gigantic map from 1536, and I was like, man, how do I get a better shot of this because I can only zoom so much on my screen? I took screenshots, 800 of them, right? And then I stitched them together, but auto mode did not work for 800 images. Anyway, in your case, 3 or 4 should be absolutely fine for auto to work, but just keep in mind, like if you were doing this for I don't know how many of you guys have ever had Google Street View, right? And it's kind of like a ball around you. As soon as you move, it kind of like makes it flat again. Well, you can take screenshots of that and you can flatten them out. It's quite amazing, actually. You can make panoramics anywhere. Anyway, we'll take those two files. So in my case, CVP, Chris V piece. We'll take those two JPEGs and we'll basically press OK. We'll let the machine do its magic. And it's basically going to try and put them together, and it couldn't do it. Some images could not be automatically aligned. Let's find out why. Well, it's because I don't have anything overlapping. As you can see, it doesn't do it quite too well. So I might want to throw in a third image in there. Does that make sense? Anyway, let's do it manually, because you can do it that way too, and we can actually see what we're missing. So in my case, I'm just going to open up those files. I was kind of hoping it would actually fail. That way I could actually show you, because there's nothing really great about it working. You're like, okay, great, there's the image, right? But let's talk about what it looks like. So if I take that piece and take that piece, and of course you guys should understand your drawing a little bit better, but if I hit C, it stands for the crop tool, and you'll notice that I can actually extend this piece of paper. Right now it's just a canvas. In my case, I'll take my other piece, probably kind of do the same thing. That way I can get the extent of the image. Hopefully some of you guys can kind of start to see that where the paper stops and that it's not exactly a perfectly white background. Neither is the paper. It's not exactly perfectly white either. And when I print this out, it doesn't show it perfectly white either. And we want it to be, right? So that is definitely one of the goals here. But let's take that piece. I'll take my selection tool here and fake it till I make it. Take that piece. Command C for copy and Command V for paste, right? Now it didn't keep my extents, and that's okay. So let's get that back. Probably because I moved to the other piece before actually getting to it. But it should bring it in as another layer, so that's pretty nice. If I take this piece and do Command T as in transform, I can actually rotate and position it just right. Now I'm guessing this goes over here, no?
Yeah, I think the top one is upside down.
Perfect. So we'll take this piece. Whee. We'll take this guy. Now what's kind of nice is as soon as you click on that layer, it does its best, right? Am I doing this right? Is that looking correct?
Yeah.
Sweet. Now that's kind of weird. Photo merge should have worked on that one. However, keep in mind, not the end of the world, right? Especially for two images, and especially for something so simple. You kind of want human error. Have I ever explained to you guys the difference between Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 4? Any fans out there? I know my D1 students have heard this, but there's actually a reason Toy Story 1 looks like shit. And it's not because the computers were 1996, it's because actually all the geometry in that movie are too perfect. There's no errors whatsoever. There's no bumps, there's no scratches, there's no anything. In fact, if you look at some of the wood, it's like, dude, that looks like fake wood, right? That we're surrounded with every single day. However, if you look at Toy Story 4, the reason it looks better is because they added the dirt, the scratches, the bumps, the human error. The human error is actually what makes something beautiful in the digital realm. It's impossible for the computer to replicate, which is why we all still have a job by the end of this AI crisis. Because it doesn't know how to do human things. It doesn't know how to make errors beautiful. In fact, I used to have this professor that said, beautiful is something that at least has mistakes. And that's kind of at least philosophical for today. But let's say I was done. I aligned them up perfectly. Keep in mind, I don't know if this is actually lined up perfectly, but the person who drew this, of course, would know that because they drew it, right? Now, once I was done with this, I'd flatten my image. So I'd take each of these layers, right-click, and of course, flatten this image. To be fair, you could do all three of these things because I only have 2 layers. But if I flatten it, of course, turns it into one beautiful homogeneous layer, as you can see. From here, it is at true scale, by the way. You'll notice on that transform, I didn't change the proportion at all because the scan that it actually comes out of there is the exact size that it is. I can't tell you how beautiful this is because there's sometimes I used to like not have something to measure something really small. So I'd scan it real quick and then measure it on the computer. Actual size, it works all the time, and I use it for 3D printing especially. But from here, we definitely don't want to put this on our model, right, or on our final composition. So one of the first things that we could do is actually set the paper size. So as you guys know, image. You have your image size and your canvas size. I would actually mess with your canvas first, especially if you had a professor who was like, well, we wanted 24 by 24. Okay, that's great. Because now at least I can get my 24 by 24 page and go, oh, okay, I need a lot more stuff, right? But realistically, guys, I don't want you to lay out your drawings, and neither does Bohuslav on Photoshop. Again, what is Photoshop for? You guys already forgot. Sorry. Images and rasterize language. Images. It's only for images, right? So keep that in mind. What if I make 2D lines in Rhino? Can I take them into Photoshop? No, thank you. Right? Because that's a vector object. Those are crisp lines, and we want crisp lines when we want crisp lines, and we want human error when we have human error, right? Don't get me wrong, we could scale the only way to make this better is a better DPI. So if the fuzziness of the line is just so bad, because, I don't know, maybe you weren't drafting with a sharp pencil that day, make sure you scan it at a really high DPI, something where around 600. It's going to take a little longer to open, but you're going to get a lot more clarity, right? It's going to take a little longer for some of these operations that we're about to do, but again, you'll have a lot better clarity. So that being the case, we got our canvas size. The next thing that we can do is, of course, I don't know about you, but this transparent background is always really annoying to me. So in my case, let's get a little bit more of my screen share going on. My bad. Because we need to make a new layer, and we'll call it background layer. Boop. We can also take our bucket tool. We'll select perfect white, which, by the way, it's not always a default white. You'd be surprised. But you definitely want to make sure that you find what default white is. And as you can see, even the projector, this terrible projector, even knows the difference between those very two colors, which is pretty hard for some projectors. In our case, our best tool that we could use is make sure that you're on the layer itself and Command M as in mother, right? Another place to find it is also image, adjustments, and curves. So curves is what we'll use first. And as you can see, we have a black eyedropper tool and a white eyedropper tool. And the middle tool, I still to this day, after 20 years, have no idea what it does. That's okay. So in our case, we'll take the white eyedropper tool and we'll tell this image what we want to be white. Well, we definitely want this part to be white. We definitely want, probably arguably, whatever that is, to also be white as well. So as you can see, if I click on that, boom, matches those two colors because it literally is matching to the exact white that that background is. If I take it a step further, I can get really, really close. But as you can see, it really starts to degrade my lines, almost even makes them thinner. You guys see that? I don't necessarily want to do that too much. And don't get me wrong, I know your minds are all like, that looks way better than my drawing. But it doesn't, because what you're actually doing is removing that human error. And keep in mind, you want that stuff because whatever's left over starts to not make your heart beat anymore, to of course use Bohuslav's terms. So another tool that we can use is actually setting the black point. This one's much more dangerous, by the way, because if I don't choose the darkest element in this piece, I get some really wild results. So for instance, say I accidentally chose this gray. Oh snap, right? That's definitely a loss of character. It doesn't even have the same tonal. It almost looks like a very contrasty black and white drawing. That's definitely not what I want to do to my drawing. So you can also try it again, right? I'm trying to keep that softness. I'm trying to keep the clarity of it. So again, Command M, white eyedropper tool, and get it as close as possible, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I kind of want some of that Toy Story 4 in there. I want some of that dirt. I want some of that non-softness, if you will, right? But I don't want too much. So I'll press OK. And definitely not too bad, but you'll notice as I'm zooming in and out, you kind of see it still, right? So what can we do? Well, I can quite literally grab my lasso tool, my polygonal lasso tool, and I go, oh yeah, that is trash. I don't want that. I don't want whatever that is. And quite literally just going around some of these things. Now, obviously, I'll hold spacebar and I can pan, spacebar again. And I can get really close to my drawing as well, but I don't want to remove my construction lines. Again, those are the humanness. For the sake of argument and tutorial today, though, I will. I definitely want to keep that. In fact, I would even go around it. But what's nice about this now is, well, I'm basically toning down what I want the computer to look at. Again, also why we have a job is, well, the computer may be artificially intelligent, but it literally still has no idea what we're doing. So in my case, it doesn't know that I'm trying to keep the humanness alive. In fact, it would probably stop me. But in my case, just trying to show you what to do, right? I kind of like that line in there. I'm going to keep it, right? I mean, it was, after all, there for a reason. However, if I can't find my closing spot, I can also double-click twice, and it'll complete that drawing as well. So pretty nice. If I want to get the inverse of it, I can right-click and select the inverse of what I selected. And again, I could choose my eye bucket and really further that white. Now, as you can see, I didn't have a true white going on there. See how it's slightly off there? You need true white. You'd be surprised how hard it is to actually see white. But in my case, and Command D for deselect, that's a pretty crisp drawing, huh? And again, it only took about 2 tools. right? And arguably, if I wasn't even talking, it would go even faster. Now, the next piece that I can do is I could add color, shade and shadow. I can maybe even kind of enhance this, but in a particular way. Now, in my case, I kind of want to save this off. So just to pretend, before we get it into Illustrator, I don't necessarily need a 24 by 24, right? In my case, I'd probably want to shrink this down. I'd probably want to line up my drawing a little bit. You see how it's a little bit shorter right here, and then it's a little bit bigger right there? You guys see that? Very hard to see sometimes, especially on a computer. But you'd want to dial that in, and it definitely starts to make some grid lines for us in order to help with some of that alignment. But I'd want to tone it down. After all, it's got to go to a bigger page, and it's got to compose with the other pieces. So just one thing for the guys in the back, there is a way to actually make this completely transparent. If you double click on the layer itself, set it to multiply, and we take literally the white out. Oh, sorry. You do have to select the whole piece. Multiply. Should be able to actually take the white out of this drawing. And as you can see, check this out. We'll turn off that background layer. Did I accidentally do it to my background layer? All right. You can actually remove all the white space, is what I'm trying to say. Now, you probably don't need to do that for this project, but just kind of want to throw it out there, especially in this next part where you're trying to add color. Now, anytime I try to add something to my drawings, I would definitely express a different layer and, of course, labeling it. So perhaps shade coloring. You can also lock these, by the way. So you could use those too, and there's this little lock guy right there. That's super helpful, especially when I'm trying not to move stuff around. I'm trying to color something very specifically. In my case, maybe I actually want to get these rich shadows a little bit more rich. So in my case, again, my favorite tool of all time, the polygonal lasso tool. And this is where I basically, in my case, I'd want to match exactly what I did there. But in your case, you might just need to fake it till you make it. And just go really fast. I could also add to my selection, so maybe I want to actually do this multiple times, or maybe I want to do it to all of these surfaces. So, well, let's add that to the surface. In my case, this one will be a little bit trickier. I'll hold shift. You'll see that it turns into a little plus sign. Kind of hard to see, but my cursor is basically turned into a plus sign or a minus sign. You guys see that? So shift to add, alt or option on Mac to subtract. So again, there's no errors here. But in my case, I'm going to hold shift because I know I've got something pretty straight here. And again, polygonal lasso tool. You'll notice that I'm clicking on the line, by the way, because eventually I want this line to, well, cover up any digitalness. I'd rather my drawing than anything digital. Unless you get the Wacom involved, because now it can synthesize even analog pretty dang well, which is what we're doing with, these screens. But in my case, fake it till I make it, you'll notice some of my errors in there. I kind of like errors. Seriously. You'd be surprised how you're the only one who actually notices them, because we're often the hardest people on our drawings than anybody else. By the way, shade and shadows don't have edge lines. But you can erase that now that you know some of these Photoshop tricks. Obviously, I would, trace this. And keep in mind, I only have to do this once. It's not like I have to do this every time that, I want to perform a color change. But again, see that blue in there? Man, just try getting a computer to do something like that. Let alone even knowing that it exists and why your drawing is so perfect because of these, in fact, anomalies. But very often we feel like we need to remove them, being the very perfectionist that we are trained to be. But you don't have to. What's nice is now we have this selected. It's got the little running ants, and we got this selected. I'll select my new portion. I'll hit B for brush. And, well, we'll use a nice brush today. I don't know. We'll go with markers. Why not? This is where I'd bust out the Wacom and I'd quite literally just draw on top of it. But in my case, I don't know, I might be going for kind of a soft blue, or maybe I want to warm up this drawing. I get some kind of warmer color involved. Maybe like a warm gray. Pretty sweet. Now I don't have to worry about accidentally drawing the rest of the drawing, because it's not going to. In my case, it's not going to get any of it. Let's see why. Oh, switch it around. No? What's going on? Although this happens when you're screen recording. So let's make sure it's not screen recording issues. No, those are locked. Okay, okay. Is my transparency all the way up? Ooh, that'll do it. Nothing? Nothing? Oh, it looks like I didn't accidentally get that piece. That's okay. I can actually go back to my selection tool, and again, I can hold shift, click, and add to that selection. Good. Like I said, I kind of like making mistakes because you guys are going to make mistakes, and you'll just know that it doesn't have to be a mistake. So again, there's that piece. Now, I don't want to be here all day, but I really do like that human error. I can't express that enough. I also don't want it at 100%. I just did that to make sure I could see it a little bit better. Everybody knows that a marker is slightly translucent. But one thing that we could do is actually hold shift, and that gives us a straight line, which is super helpful sometimes. But I kind of want that overlap. You know, after all, I'm trying to add Toy Story 4. I'm not trying to make it Toy Story 1. In fact, I'll even add a little bit of air in there on purpose. Why? Again, so I can make it more like Toy Story 4. Very often you'll find that a perfect drawing is often too perfect. And I know that this is technically, in my mind, a little bit lighter, so going towards the back will make it slightly darker over here. See what I mean? But nobody has to know. Everybody will now look at your drawings and go, how did you do that? And you won't tell them the secret between Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 4. But we don't stop there, because right now that's actually on top of our drawing. We actually want it to be below our drawing. But like I said, we got to remove that white space. So I'd want to take this piece. Again, blending options. Now this should work, but multiply, and now you can see how the lines actually are on top of the color. Now I don't have to remove that much white, as you can see, right? Because literally too much is too much. Usually I just do a small pinch there, especially to remove the white background. But as you can see, I mean, we're talking pixel perfect here. But again, pixel perfect of something that looks analog, but yet doesn't have to know that it was digital. Let's make this one blue. Why? Because the opposite of warm and cold, right, actually starts to gray things out. You guys know about your primary, tertiary, all those, it's all very scientific. What gets really weird is when actually light that you see is the same as color frequency, and color frequency is the same as sound frequency, and sound frequency is actually like maybe making everything. I don't know. They say that God spoke one word and created a universe, but a universe just means one word. Anyway, food for thought. But in our case, let's synthesize and make some more color. So I'll use this layer again, and I don't really have to move it around all the time now that I've got my blending options set up. But again, I want to take my piece and I want to maybe extend this kind of shadowy beast going on. Again, you know your drawings better than I do, but maybe I want this piece as well. You guys see that piece in there? Boop. I say boop a lot, but I think that's also because I have a 3-year-old. Sometimes you don't know what word to teach them, so you just say boop. But maybe I want to get this whole piece. Fake it till I make it. Obviously, for the sake of tutorial, guys, I'm just trying to go super fast. I'm not being super accurate, nor do I want you to kind of do what I'm doing, if that makes sense. But, you know your drawings better. Right, now I'm going to kind of skip the rest of that because, you know, that's a lot of tracing to do. But keep in mind, you only have to do it once, and I'll show you why. Because you can always take these pieces and refine them, right? So, yeah, I should probably refine that one too. But as you can see, I'm going to just fake it till I make it. And naturally, when I do get to the close, you can double click and, of course, get that close. I don't know why it stopped there, but it did. That's okay. We'll use blue, and we'll put it on my shading coloring. We'll go for my brush tool again. I'll use the opposite color. Kind of like that cooler blue going on there. And we'll brush that in. I don't want to be here all day, so we'll brush it in largely. And again, I kind of like that air. Again, I can hold shift, and I kind of want the air. You know what I mean? Anyway. But as you can see, I can Command D to deselect. it's already on top of that layer, and I could even further it down too, so if it was a bit too much. But again, we're using this to enhance the drawing, right? It's starting to make certain things pop, and even realistically still look analog. So again, just throwing that out there. I've also changed a lot of the brushes that are available on Photoshop, but if you notice, you don't have this one. So if I type the letter B, right click, you'll notice that I actually loaded these brushes for all the computers called Dig Sketch, right? So one thing to definitely look for, it is free, so if you want it for your computer, just let me know. I have it on my USB, you can just copy it real quick. It's very, very simple. However, from here, let's say we colored it. We've made this a lot better of a drawing. We've refined it. Now what do we do with it? Well, I need to compose it and I need to put it on a board. But one thing to express is we're not trying to make a different drawing here. We're actually just trying to enhance the beautiful things that we've already done. And unfortunately, nobody ever taught me that as a student. And very often I think as a student, you kind of go, no, computers make things perfect. They must make things perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. I must be perfect. When you actually find out in Veret's class that perfect is imperfect. See what I'm trying to say here? Anyway, so now that we have this shot, we can take it, file, and we can actually smash it down, but I mean the best thing to do is actually to export it. So export as, and we'll save it as a PNG, right? So that's looking pretty good, PNG style, export. We'll put it on the desktop for ease, and I'll call it test Bohu G2, right? Yeah, G2. And we'll save it. Boom. Most computers don't go that fast, but we'll go now to Illustrator. Now this is where you want to compose, because I don't know if he's actually given the requirements or anything, but I'm guessing it's 11 by 17. We'll go with a new file, and we could just set that up from the very beginning. We can even set up 3 of them if we really must, but for today we'll just use one, width of 17 and 11 inches height. I'll hit create, and voila, you couldn't ask for a better space. I want to verify that always, so I do a Command R or Control R on Windows and actually verify that yes, it's a 17-inch page. But keep in mind, these are going to have to shrink down. As you guys know, we just scanned it at perfect scale, and that drawing alone was already bigger than 11 by 17. The first thing to do is file and place our image. So it literally says place ... And again, I don't know why the suspense, but place ... In our case, I'll do that test Bohu G2 shot that we just manipulated. I'll click on it, and you'll notice that it comes in at true scale. Again, I can't express how awesome a scanner is and the fact that it's always to the exact scale that it's drawn. Because how many of you guys worked really hard on that as you were drafting? Why would you want to lose that? So again, starting to compose my drawing, we'll notice that it needs to get smaller. Of course we can do that, but we don't want to do it arbitrarily. We'll hold shift and of course match that proportion. Now in my case, this is where I want to set up the composition of the drawing. How many of you guys remember D1, where you took circles, triangles, and squares, or point lines and planes, and you had to recompose something? You're doing the same thing, except now with images, ideas, narratives, thoughts. But quite literally just point, line, and plane. But now a point is a thought. Now a line is a drawing. Now a plane is a narrative. See what I'm saying? So maybe I do that. Maybe I need to line this up to certain elements. You'll notice that, yes, I did magically pull out of the ruler, and it is kind of weird. It's kind of hard because there's nothing to really click on except the ruler itself, and we can click it out and of course get a generating line. These lines don't print out. You can make as many as you want. And in fact, you could actually move them as well. They don't print. You can also lock them, by the way.
Everything about these compositions is about regulating lines.
Absolutely.
Those lines, you take them everywhere and look for those. Anytime, the more lines you can make, solve, or interact with each other more than once or twice, or even 3 times, the more your composition starts to have a root, an idea, a foundation upon which to settle. There should be no composition that doesn't have just like there's never been a musical piece ever invented except for noise, which itself is conscious of the fact that there aren't any regulating lines to it. But anything you make is going to have regulating lines. And the more you can interact those effectively with each other, and you can't see them unless you draw them. And the nice thing is they're simply the computer's way of making construction lines, right? Of showing the possibility of
Yes,
activating.
exactly.
Every time you align two things, they're activated, even if you never see them again. Anyone looking at your composition is going to know there was some forethought, some hierarchy, and some organizational strategy that the parts add up to greater than the sum of the whole.
There's a
When you
word
put it
for that
together.
as well. I forget what it is. The parts are greater than the whole. Gosh, it's got a fancy French word. Anyway, in my case though,
Yeah.
it's literally why my digital drawings are so good, because guess who had construction lines in their digital drawings? This guy. Guess who nobody else did, right? And it does, it has a computer-like character. Why would I go back in and add construction lines? Well, that actually proves that this has been built in my mind, right? They didn't have to know that I post-produced those lines, right? But in our case, we're using them as a regulatory item. And what's really nice is you can actually select all of them and use your arrows on your board. You could still move those all together. I mean, seriously, can you imagine moving one of those lines on your drafting table? That's like a new piece of paper every single time, right? But in our case, it's now ease. But the reason it's so beautiful and I talk about it so expressively is because I know what it takes. You guys know what it takes to do this for real. The planning. And I want you to take those skills and apply them to the computer, because you'll be even that much better at the computer as somebody who's planning ahead, just like they would on a drafting table. It's the reason why this school does better than all the other 2-year or first 2-year universities, at least my opinion. But it's because we understand what it takes to actually do that. But in our case, I did pull some images from Pinterest because there's no time to, of course, scan all of y'all's drawings for one tutorial. So I got a couple from the internet, one like this. Obviously, I'd want to take that into Photoshop real quick. Let's just,
Construction lines there, though.
yeah.
Reminds me of your drawing, Nadia. That's okay?
Thank you.
See, that was a compliment, but it deserves it.
I don't know why it opened up a different Photoshop. Same thing, Command M, and like I said, eventually you start getting really good at this. You can do levels as well and kind of brighten it or darken it. I want to make it look more like a sketch, so I'm kind of lightening it. You can also hit C, dial that in a little bit better. And again, I kind of took this one on purpose because I noticed it had some errors that we could deal with. And again, you guys already know how to color it now as well. Another thing that's really great about the Adobe is you can actually drag these in, usually, into other programs. Oh, I don't want to put it into Photoshop, but I do want to put it into here.
Chris, did you talk about how you can make the black lines of shadow darker?
Yes,
Okay.
I did.
Good.
Yeah, so you'll notice, actually, I've got 2 Photoshops open. Hold on. Let's save that one off. And for quickness today, oh my gosh, this is why you don't open 2 Photoshops. Here, get rid of that one. Boop. And there we go. You can just drag and drop that one in, apparently not as in a crop mode. But I'm going to take a screenshot real quick because it's a tutorial. Obviously, you do the same process, guys. Export, place, right? In my case, I'm going for speed because we have 10 minutes. So I want to compose those. And maybe the first thing that I actually do is line up to a certain drawing. You'll see that the program even tries to help us out a little bit. See how it locks in? I love that that's like a new term that you guys use. I've said it like forever, like, dude, lock in. Anyway. But again, now I could actually line up some of these elements. You guys see that? And it's with ease. So again, I'm not going to overdo it today because really that's the exercise, starting to develop the hierarchy. Which one gets seen first? Which one gets seen second? Which one kind of adds to this narrative? Do you start to get this person to kind of go around in circles without necessarily putting the drawings in a circle? Does that make sense? Perhaps my drawing is very linear. Maybe my design that I came up with is very direct, and maybe I kind of want you to flow that way, to emphasize maybe the narrative of how you walk through your observation tower. Maybe it is this long shot thing and you have a big drawing, medium drawing, and a couple of small drawings. How many of you guys have ever, you probably have a favorite movie, right? If you've ever seen Mission Impossible, how do they start off each of those movies? 2 months ago, previously, gigantic thing, like leading up to a climax, and then they go 2 weeks earlier, right? And it starts off very slow. That is composition. If you've ever seen a Wes Anderson film, it starts off very small, very symmetrical, right? And it just absolutely builds with anticipation. And a lot of people go, oh man, how are these guys so good at directing? How do they compose such great music? How do they write such good books? It's because they're composing all of those words. They're composing all of those scenes. And they're composing all of the elements that they're putting together. We do the exact same thing in architecture, not only in the building and the parts itself, but also the way in which we communicate that to others. If you've ever opened a magazine, it's not just all ads. You'd put that magazine away. But it's story, full page magazine. Story, half page ad. Story. Chanel magazine, because they can afford it, right? Some Chanel ad, right? And they get the full page. They paid the full $5,000 to get that in there. You see what I'm saying? So eventually this composition even equals money for us as designers. Does that make sense? Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk today. However, I do want to open it up to questions. Is there anybody who wants me to repeat something again for the video? Or
What's your YouTube channel?
YouTube channel is Chris Verrett. If you just type in Chris Verrett, that's essentially the first thing that comes up. It'll say Crabapple Designs, as in CAD.
Any other questions?
And I'll get that uploaded as soon as today. So I figured out how to upload at the school at a decent rate. So now I do that and it takes 20 minutes. So, good question.
So I wanted to jump in on that. And so there are still a few things. I don't know if you've talked about color yet.
I did do a little bit of
Okay,
color.
Good.
Yeah.
So y'all have seen, maybe you haven't seen this one. So this was a composite done last spring, and it has so many of the goals of what we're talking about, right? It has, as opposed to still the most clear observation out there is the black blacks, the white whites, and the grayscale is missing. In general, they're too light as a whole, or in Austin's case, they're probably both too dark, right? To find that balance between, and then consistency between shade and shadow is going to be a big part of it. But what I want, so as you continue to work on your drawings, in some cases still analog, still by hand, you've got until next Monday to kind of make sure that you have to be working on this composition like beginning today, right now. But if you know, like in a couple of cases, I don't have your orthographic drawings, or maybe in Gabby's case, I don't have her 1 point. You have to finish those, but the effort and the deadlines need to be met on this composite. This composite, if you haven't noticed, and a lot of you still don't really look at Canvas very much, is 25% of your final grade. You're going, why? I've done all this hard work over 75. It's because a lot of you might have struggled in that process, and now you have a chance to put it all together and wrap it up with a nice ribbon, right? And get 25% A to help whatever it is you're struggling with. So I want you to kind of understand that the only way this gets started is by creating a kind of visual hierarchy. Each of you has to decide, and it's a really good idea to see them out there before you take them down, but it's also a really good idea to pin them up on your own wall and put your drawings up without the shade and shadow and decide, is there a drawing or two, or the orthographic or whatever the case may be, that I don't want to use the shade and shadow, that it wasn't successful. Doesn't have to be on every one of these drawings. I highly recommend that it's on your perspective drawings, and those are the most successful. I highly recommend that it's on your plan oblique if possible. I think your weakest drawings consistently are your orthographic drawings, but they can still have an impact. Either way, you're deciding most important or a kind of shared importance
and that kind of supporting audience, right? The supporting drawings that kind of lead to those. Remember, we in the West think right to left to right, top to bottom. So there's a kind of origin story here, right? That leads to how the work. There's also how the shade and shadow fall, drawing you into a composition. There's all kinds of factors that you might use to create hierarchy, to create emphasis, to create where your eye wants to move. That's the key. And how you can kind of capture that movement in a way that tells the story that, as you look at those, and everybody, Professor Escamilla was marveling at the success of what you've been able to accomplish, even with a lot of struggles, right? And maybe imperfections, just shall we say. There still is a big picture that can be told on a very small drawing. This is smaller than any one of your drawings that you've made, but it carries the successes of all of them, and you have a chance to highlight that success by identifying your most successful, your second most successful, your third most successful, and trying to balance those. Kind of 1, 2, 3, or even 1, 2. It's hard to say between those two, right? You don't have to worry about color yet. You don't have to worry about necessarily your line weight. All of those are what you're going to be working on once you have a composition. The key for me for this first week, for next Monday, you have a composition printed, and you work on cleaning it up. You work on adding color, and by Wednesday, I want you to have an analog sketch, just 11 by 17 sheet of paper, and I want you to have proportionately, and it's even a good idea to say if that was, in the original maybe 16 by 12, and now it's going to be 8 by 4, right?